Getting started, founding Rome in the Archaic period.
When we talk about the beginning of Rome, the origins of the city, we have to be well aware that Rome's formation did not exist in a vacuum. There are many other things going on in contemporary Italy, but really all over the Greco-Roman world, in which cities are being formed simultaneously in what we call mainland Greece today, and what we call the west coast of Turkey, and what we call Italy, Etruria, and the Sabines, and Magna Graecia, the southern end of the peninsula of Italy. All of these cities are being created, governments are being formed, people are being organized. And what takes place in Rome is taking place in other places. But the end-all result is that we have the word CIVITAS. In civilization, we do look to Rome. What were they doing that was so unique and special?
The founding of Rome is attributed to Romulus in 753 BC, and he also ushers in what we call the Regal period. There are 7 kings: Romulus, Numa Pompilius, Tullius Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus. And it's the last one that famously is ejected from the city in 509 BC. We can attribute the foundation of the city and the early expansion to these 7 rulers. When we look at the archaeological evidence for these kings and for their presence in the city, we can actually go even before the Regal period and find 10th century BC burials on the Esquiline Hill and the Capitoline Hill.
From atop the Capitoline Hill, you can look over at the Temple of Saturn on the slopes, which overlooks the Roman Forum Basin. So you've got this communication between one very early hill, the Capitoline Hill, overlooking the natural basin which becomes drained out and is the Roman Forum. And on the other side of it, you have another important historic hill, the Palatine. And together, it's in between that they hem in what is known as Forum Magnum, first occupied in Rome's earliest history. The Palatine Hill is one of the most famous hills of ancient Rome. And we take it right back to the beginning when we talk about the Palatine Hill. This is the hill in which Romulus is credited with founding the city. And the archaeological remains of that first settlement go back to the 10th century BC into the 8th century BC. And of course, in the 8th century BC, we have the official founding date of Rome, 753 BC. Now, the layout of the area around here is the Palatine is on one side of a natural valley, which becomes known as the Valley of the Circus Maximus, which over time is filled in with one of the greatest centers of spectacle in the ancient world, the Circus Maximus. And on the opposite side of this valley, opposite from the Palatine Hill, you have the Aventine Hill. So historically, and also in terms of founder's legend, we have Romulus associated with the Palatine Hill, and the Aventine Hill associated with Remus, Romulus' twin brother. Palatine Hill itself is attributed in its name to the goddess Pallas, whose festival day was April 21st. And that is the birth date, the founding date of ancient Rome, still celebrated today.
We can look at the first substantial settlement on the Palatine Hill, and with the imprints of the huts, ultimately by the Romans attributed to Romulus. But we do have that construction found with the archaeological evidence in the early 1900s, right where the ancient sources say that they were located. Ultimately, you're going to have the House of Augustus located next to it, also near the Republican Temple of Magna Mater. It's to Servius we attribute the designation of the city into 4 regions. Ultimately, we have an early city with a wall circuit attributed again to Servius, and later reconstructed or added to in the 4th century BC, still known as the Servian walls. The traditional date for that is 378 BC, using the Grotto Scura Tuff from the quarries in the recently destroyed city of Veii. That destruction took place in 396. So we get a sense of this wonderful archaic city, one of the largest in the ancient world for its day, when we look at the plastico in the Museo della Civiltà Romana. This is a wonderful representation of the look and feel of those hills, the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, the activities, the buildings located in the Forum Basin, and over to the Forum Boarium, we see that the reality is much wetter and the presence of the Tiber is much stronger than it is today with the massive flood walls put in place. So the relationship between the Romans and the river is much more organic than it is today.
The Tiber River was Rome's lifeline to the Mediterranean. Without the Tiber River, you wouldn't have had that great dynamic between Rome and its empire. It might not even have been possible. Now, already in Rome's early history, it's the crossing of the Tiber River that starts to form and shape the well-being of the city of Rome, controlling the access to the salt pans at the mouth of the Tiber River, for example. And of course, right here by the Tiber Island was one of the easiest places to cross the Tiber. And in fact, along the Tiber River, life of Rome developed. There was the initial emporium right next to the Forum Boarium, or the cattle market. The Forum Boarium is one of the most historic spots in ancient Rome. We have the Forum, we have Romulus founding the city on the Palatine Hill, but before all of that, even according to the Romans, you have an occupation in the low ground here next to the Tiber River. This was the first emporium. This is the place that Hercules visited and came across Greeks, particularly led by Evander. This is recorded in Virgil's Aeneid. We don't have that much archaeological evidence to back up occupation or presence of Greeks for the Mycenaean period beyond a few pottery fragments. But what we do have is a very long tradition that links Rome to Hercules, who was here long before the founding in Rome. And we have here then one of those temples dedicated to this great hero, the round temple in the Forum Boarium, or the cattle market.
Where can we see examples of this early Rome? Well, we can go and look at the foundations of the original Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus inside today's Capitoline museums. We can go and examine and peek down into the excavations taking place on the slopes of the Palatine Hill. These digs are led by La Sapienza. We can also look to the famous sanctuary of SANT'OMOBONO. This is in the Forum Boarium, and new studies have revealed the old excavations from the 1920s and re-examined the periods of occupation starting in the Archaic phase with a very impressive temple.
A rich oral tradition is matched by a substantial archaeological record. As we dig down into Rome, in places like the Forum, we have revealed many instances of archaeological materials corroborating with the oral stories handed down from Rome's earliest days. We can look to the lapis niger in the Roman Forum. We can go to new excavations on the slopes of the Palatine Hill. We can go over to the Area Sacra of SANT'OMOBONO. New discoveries have been made in recent years, and we can be sure, as excavations continue, that more discoveries are sure to come.